Okay, class, welcome back. I hope you guys are doing well today. Today we're going to be looking at feudalism, and feudalism, I'll define it in the PowerPoint, but feudalism is a societal structure that develops and really takes root for many centuries in Europe and England. A lot of times we think of England with feudalism, but it was all throughout Europe. And it's where you basically have a king on top, and he has given lands to nobles who are sometimes called lords, and then they give land to other nobles or lords, which are smaller than them. And usually those are the knights that you may think of fighting in a battle. And then underneath of the knights are the people that work the land, which are the serfs, and the serfs basically they become the foot soldiers in a battle. And so there's this hierarchical structure that takes place in medieval Europe and in England. And as I said, it lasts a long time. It's not necessarily fair. Definitely the serf is tied to the land and they have a hard life and they don't have very much. And then the king is on top, or the lords are on top, and they have all kinds of stuff. But it worked, and they functioned as a society all throughout Europe for many generations, many centuries. And they fought battles this way. The government was structured this way. It was a political thing. It was a relationship thing, a societal thing. The church was very involved in all of that because you had a priest in charge of a church in a local area, and then there was a bishop, which is a larger area, and then a cardinal, and all of that. That even gets quite large. So it's this societal structure that takes place during the Middle Ages. And so today we are going to be looking at the development of that and who's involved with what and who does what. So stay tuned. Okay, class, we're going to now move into Middle Ages Part 2, our second PowerPoint. Middle Ages Part 2. Before we move in, I did want to give an interesting note. I didn't put this in the last PowerPoint with Charlemagne, but it's important to know this. I'd like you to know it. So one of the interesting things that the Aachen Cathedral, which is in Germany, that's present-day Germany, in Aachen, Germany, was built in 1215 A.D., and this is the location that has the bones of Charlemagne. And this is really interesting because just a few years later, after it was completed, the building of it, and Charlemagne's bones were there, it was consecrated as a reliquary. And a reliquary is a place that holds relics for the Roman Catholic Church. It was consecrated as a reliquary in 1239 AD. So it holds relics. Now, relics are believed, some people believe them, to be actual artifacts from the time of Christ that can basically impart grace to somebody if you go and make a pilgrimage to where the relic is and look at it and pray and do whatever at the place of the relic. And so at the Aachen Cathedral in Germany, the Roman Catholics believe that the relics that are there are Jesus' swaddling clothes, the napkin and loincloth of Jesus from when he was in the tomb, a dress that is one of Mary's dresses, and the decapitation cloth of John the Baptist. Now, this is very interesting because many people believe that these are the true items. I do not believe they are. I don't believe relics like this are around. I don't believe anyone has the Jesus swaddling clothes. But Roman Catholics definitely believe this, and they make pilgrimages to these places. Well, the interesting thing about the Aachen Cathedral relics is that these relics are only shown to the public once every 7 years. And this has happened ever since 1349 AD, when a severe plague, Black Death, hit Europe in 1349. And since then, every 7 years, the artifacts are put on display. Or the relics, I should say, are put on display. And the next showing of the relics is coming up here in a little bit. In 2021, they're going to open up the chest that holds these relics and there's going to be pilgrimages to this cathedral, and people are going to look at these relics. And what they do is they'll pray and they'll light candles and all that stuff, thinking that they're going to get some sort of grace from God for doing this. Oh no, okay, so there's a problem with the PowerPoint there. This is the cathedral in the back. You'll just have to look that up on the internet. I can't remove this right now. But this is the chest. I'll just go to the next PowerPoint. This is the chest inside the Aachen Cathedral that holds these 4 relics: the swaddling clothes, the loincloth of Jesus, Mary's dress, and the decapitation cloth of John the Baptist. And you can see that down here some people. You can see how big this is elevated up in this case. And what the Catholic Church does is there's a door right here, and they open this door. There's a lock on it, and they open it, and the relics are inside there, and people can see the relics. So it's just an interesting note that you have the burial place of Charlemagne and these very significant relics to the Catholic Church are in the same cathedral. It kind of shows the importance of Charlemagne being crowned by the Pope as the Emperor of the Romans for the Holy Roman Empire. Okay, so we'll move on past that interesting note. We're going to be looking at feudalism today. Feudalism. How did the people organize society after the Roman Empire and Charlemagne? So after the Carolingian dynasty fell and basically the Roman Empire was harassed by these different people groups, the Muslims and the Vikings and all that, how is it that really the people organized in society? Well, it became a feudalistic state, and feudalism is characterized. It's the political and social order of medieval Europe. It's how the government is run, and it's how the people function in society. So you have the people in charge, like the lords. They're the ones that run the government and all of that under the king. And then you have the people that work the land. And so everyone kind of has their own place in society, and it's difficult to move around in those places. So the feudal system is a hierarchy of lords and vassals who collectively took charge of political and military affairs on the basis of personal relationships. And what that means is that you have the lords who and vassals, which that's the hierarchy. They have a relationship with one another in regards to one being the lord, one being the vassal, and they function politically, they function militarily, they function culturally and socially together in their place in society. And it basically the culture it functioned, it worked. It might not seem very fair, especially to the serf who basically has nothing. But it did work, and it worked for many years. It did not bring about much change in regards to the overall social movement. It's still considered the Dark Ages. It's still considered the Middle Ages, all of that. Feudalism is going to fall, especially during the time of the Renaissance. But you have the structure within society, and it does work. It works for centuries. In the absence of an effective central authority, such as an emperor, local notables or lords mobilize small private armies composed of armed retainers. And the retainer is someone that's either works the land or has control over the land for the noble or the lord. So you have this central authority that's missing, such as an emperor, and so these local lords kind of take control of their own area. When they do get a king, then those local lords will fall under the king, and that again becomes the structure. We'll see that just in a little bit. Rulers could pay their knights in currency, or they could give the knight. Now, the rulers could not pay their knights in currency. They could not pay their knights in currency. Instead, they gave each knight land as payment. And so now you have usually a knight is over their land. A lord can be a knight, and they're over their land, and the land is worked by serfs. So this system of exchanging land in return for military service is part of feudalism. So the knight will fight for the ruler, and the ruler will give them land, and the land is worked by the serf under the knight. And the knight would be like a noble person, a lord. The man who granted land was known as a lord. The man who received the land was a vassal. And the land a vassal received from his lord was called a fief. Okay, so those are some terms you need to know. Feudalism, lord, vassal, and fief. A fief included not only the land, but everyone on it, even the peasants who farmed it. As time went on, vassals won the right to pass their land on to their descendants. So if you have a lord who has given land to a knight who is a vassal, and that knight has a son, that knight's son will inherit the land from his father. And now the knight's son, who most likely would become a knight, would also then pay homage to the lord. And everything that is on that land, that fief, belongs to that vassal. And the money would always go up. The produce would always go up. So whatever was harvested on the land, the serf, the low guy, wouldn't get very much. The vassal would get a lot of it, and then the vassal would give some more to the lord, and then the lord would give some of that to the king. So it kind of just moved up like that. Both lords and their retainers were warriors. So the lord and the vassal, that's a retainer. The vassal were warriors with horses, weapons, military expertise. That cost money. It cost money to have horses. It cost money to have weapons. It cost money to be able to learn the military techniques. The serf is not the one that's out there studying how to make war. The serf is working the land. Now the serf is going to go fight in wars, but they're not the ones that are going to be leading the armies in wars. Lords sometimes rewarded their retainers or vassals with grants of land or some other valuable, rights to income generated by a mill. That was the main focal point of the agricultural society, was the mill. So they would grow wheat or whatever grain they grew, and then they would take it to the mill, and it would be ground so they could make flour and then bread and all that. So the mill was a very central part of the community in feudalism. So the money that came in from that, the lord would allow their vassal to have rights to that income. They would also allow their vassals to receive rents or payments from a village. So when you start getting into especially serfdom and the feudal structure of the town and the village, you would have the specialties, like you would have the mill, and you would have the blacksmith, and you would have the different areas of the town that would create certain products. Well, they would rent the building or the lands or whatever it may be. They would rent that, and then they could receive the money from that rent. Or sometimes just the lords would give them money, payment of money. They would just give it to them for what they did. Okay, so a decline into feudalism. So how is it that we got into feudalism? When the Carolingian Empire crumbled, power was decentralized and became located in the local landowners. So once the Carolingian dynasty kind of went away and crumbled, the local landowners basically began to control vast areas. They controlled their land. They didn't really answer to anybody because there wasn't really anyone above them. So they became quite powerful. There was a personal element. The landowner or the nobleman would be the lord, and the one who lived on his land would be the vassal. And this was the economic and social arrangement. There was the property element. The vassal received land to live on and farm, and he would have it farmed by his serfs. But the lord would make demands of the vassal and call him to military service. And so if the lord went to war, he would call on his vassals, who were knights, into military service. The government element, the lord exercised private power over the vassal in these areas. He protected his vassals and they served him. So there was a governmental kind of element to it also. So the nobles' obligation, what did they have to do? By the 9th century, soldiers mounted on horseback had proven to be superior foot soldiers. They could manage a sword, a shield, a lance, while controlling a horse, which requires a lot of skill and a long time of training. And again, if you're a serf, you don't have the time to go train. You don't have a horse. You don't have weapons like that. So this is going to be the knight. This is going to be the one that is in charge of the land. The warrior on horseback had to be rich enough to acquire weapons and be free from farm work in order to train. Thus, there emerged a special class of mounted soldiers called knights. And then the rulers depended on the service of a great number of knights to fight in their wars and protect their lands. So you have the noble, the lord, who is in charge of a lot of land, and they've given it to knights who are skilled warriors and skilled with their weapons, and they run the land for the lord, and the land is worked by serfs, and the rulers will then protect these lands for the knights, and use the army of knights and foot soldiers, who are going to be the serfs, called up to war, to protect the lands from invaders. So the vassal's obligation. The vassals had to pay homage, which is show respect and reverence to the lord or nobleman. They made a public vow of homage or allegiance that a vassal made to his lord. They would make it to the lord of their land. As a vassal of a lord, a man was expected to fight at his lord's side when called upon. So the lord would go into battle, and he would bring his vassals, which are the knights. He also advised his lord on occasion and furnished financial aid at specific times. So the vassals would advise the lord of different things going on in the land or on the land, and different problems that might be taking place. Here's an example. If the lord was captured in battle and a ransom were demanded for his return, in return for his loyalty, the lord promised to protect his vassal in case of attack and defend him in the court if he was accused of some offense. So the vassal here would bring the ransom. If the lord was captured, he would bring the ransom, and then in return there would be still more protection from the lord. Kings became part of the feudal system, but only as lord among lords. The title of king gave him social prestige, and people gave him homage and gave him respect for the king. But really, the real authority rested in the hands of the lords who owned the largest area of land. And that will actually come into play, especially with King John, when the nobles rebel against the king and force him to sign the Magna Carta. So the real power rested in the lords, who basically controlled their knights, and then the foot soldiers are under the knights. So here's just a graphic I put on the screen for you to kind of show how it is. You have the peasants on the bottom, and they own no land. They really weren't part of the feudal system, but they were just the laborers. Many peasants worked on the land owned by nobles or knights. The knights served their noble lords in exchange for land. So these knights, even though they're in battle gear right here, they would actually be the rulers of the land that the serfs or peasants would work. Nobles were vassals of kings and queens. Many were also lords of lower-ranking nobles and knights. And then kings and queens, they were on the top. The greatest lords of Europe and all nobles and knights were their vassals. Okay, so just kind of a graphic. I have another one here. kind of showing the feudal system in the way it looks on the land, and so we'll just run through it really quick. So the center place of the land, so this would be like the manor house. This would be where the knight would live, and he and his family would live there, and he controls all these lands. It's been given to him by the nobleman, and so he's the vassal here, and this is his castle, and that's where he's basically in charge. So you have his fields all over here. These are all his fields. This is his orchard. Okay? But then when you get into the actual village, so these are the houses of the peasants. And so here's the peasants here. They have a well, a tannery, which would make deal with the animal skins and all that. You have a bakehouse for baking bread. Here's the mill for grinding the flour. Here's the blacksmith. Here's the church and the priest's house. Here's the common pasture. So these animals would be used for milk and stuff for the people here in the town. And of course, the lord here of the manor would definitely get what he needed from the village. So everything went through. All of the stuff that was produced through here went through the lord of the manor. Okay, so you kind of just see the breakdown of it. Now, this guy here, the lord, if he's a knight, which most of them were, if he got called up to battle with the noblemen off to war, well, the foot soldiers would come from these ranks. The peasants would become the foot soldiers, and they didn't need a lot of skill in regards to riding a horse or anything, but they could hold a sword and shoot an arrow and maybe carry an axe. These guys would become the foot soldiers. So it's a very structured culture. Okay, so that's it for our second PowerPoint of the Middle Ages. I'll see you in a second. Okay, class, that's going to be it for today. We covered a little bit of information there on feudalism. Next time, we'll be looking at the foundation, the beginning of England. Take care.